Welcome back to Bit by Bit. In today's episode, I'm speaking to Otto. Otto is joining us from the year 2028. He's contacted me to speak to everyone listening and warn us not to be too complacent. He warns us that unless we fight for our freedom of speech, freedom of association, and sound money, the world can look very dark in just a few short years. Luckily, he has some advice on how to fight this. I think for anybody who's paying attention, you can see that the world is at a bit of a tipping point. There's a lot of people who are very unhappy, and a lot of them for good reason. There's a lot of uncertainty, and I'm noticing that even people who never would normally speak to me about Bitcoin are starting to ask questions. Maybe it's because everyone's had some more time on their hands, or maybe it's because everyone's seeing that the institutions that we put our trust in are actually not able to cope with what's happening with COVID and everything else in the world. For those people who have reached out and asked me questions about where to buy, what to do, where to store your coins, there's going to be a lot of information in this podcast and also on Otto's website. I'd also like to say, from now and going forward, I'm going to be sponsored by CoinFloor. CoinFloor is the UK's longest running Bitcoin exchange. Obi, the CEO, came on the show a couple of days ago. He is a proper, hardcore, down for the cause Bitcoiner. I had a great time chatting with him. I'm really proud to have them sponsor this show. I've been waiting to have a company that I feel that I can trust and that I would send my family if they're going to go and buy Bitcoin from an exchange. I want it to firstly be Bitcoin only. As has been discussed on this show many times, I think it is the most important, and also even just as an investment, it is by far the best bet. So I wouldn't feel comfortable sending anyone who's listening to a shitcoin casino where they're going to get confused and buy the wrong thing. The second thing that I always advise people when they ask me about when to buy and how much and is it a good time, I always say to them, just buy a little bit every week or every day or every month and it will average it out, because when you're first getting into this space, it's very difficult to cope with your emotions when you've just bought a large amount of Bitcoin and it suddenly either rises by 20-30% or drops by the same amount, and you're thinking, oh, should I hold, should I sell? And we all think that we're traders when we first get in, and for 99% of people that is a very, very quick way to lose money. So I always advise people just to buy a little bit every week and just sit and forget about it, because it's a lot less stressful. CoinFloor is allowing its users to buy a little bit every day, every week, every month. You set it however you want. I'm going to go into a lot more detail on this with Obi. I just want to say thank you so much to CoinFloor for supporting the show. This takes a lot of time and effort, and although I love it, it's great just to have some sponsorship where I can afford maybe some better equipment and move forward and make this show the best it can be. So thank you to them, and for anyone who is looking for a good quality Bitcoin only exchange in the UK, CoinFloor is the place to go. Thanks very much everyone, and enjoy the show. Hi Otto, can you hear me?
Hello Max, yes I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you great. That's amazing. What technology are you using so that we can hear one another?
I am speaking to you from an old Android device from your time. It is equipped with Graphene OS to keep me surveillance free, and also has some pretty magical software on here that allows me to communicate with your time.
Amazing. Well, it's pretty surreal speaking to you in the future, but I've read through your diary, so I feel almost like I already know you. And I just want to say I'm amazed with what you're doing. It's incredible. And thank you so much for fighting the good fight. I'm sure we'll get a little bit into your story here, but it sounds like you've gone through it. And I just wanted to say I'm really sorry to hear about your GMAR. That must have been very difficult for you.
Of course, GMAR, she raised me. She taught me everything I knew. She prepared me for the battles to come in my life. So it was a huge loss when it was her time. But I feel just fortunate that she was able to hold on for so long, even when she was in a state of bedriddance for quite some time. We were fortunate to be able to continue to spend time together in the metaverse through our brain link sensors. And she was able to continue to prepare me, which was much needed. But I appreciate your kind words.
You were saying there about your brain link. That sounds like an amazing bit of technology. I very much wish that I'd had that when I fell down the rabbit hole, because for your, I think it said 6 days in your diary, it had taken you to download all that information. It took me a couple of years. I wish I'd have had that technology to save me some time.
It's a huge advantage in many ways, and I'm fortunate to have it. At the same time, though, I wish I could have consumed the rabbit hole content at a more leisurely pace and enjoyed it, because it truly is some of the most remarkable content that exists in your time. I feel like that's something underappreciated, that the amount of intellectual capital that is being created in your time, it goes on and proves its worth more and more as time passes.
That's good to hear. There's quite a few of us that are working very hard trying to wake people up to the alternate future, and it sounds like you're living it. So we're working as hard as we can to try and change things. Is it all futile? Is the future just going to happen and play out exactly as your time is, or are there different timelines?
No, that's, the one thing that I've learned from this that I feel like is most important for the people of your time to learn from my experience is that the future is not predetermined. We can shape it with our actions. Bitcoin specifically has already proved itself in many ways as a source of truth, and one of the only sources of truth that exists, and being made for the people and having incentives that align with the interests of the people. It is, I believe, destined to prevail, but the path to getting to that destination can vary so much, and depending on that path, there can be a lot of suffering that takes place that is not necessary. So that's what my hope is with my story, and that's why I think it's so incredible the work that you're doing and so many of your time are doing to educate people. The more we can convince people to stand up for Bitcoin, the more we can be prepared for the coming money wars and stave off a lot of the suffering that would otherwise we'd have to fight against in the money wars, and all be better off in the long term.
It sounds like quite a scary place you're living in at the moment. I mean, a few things that I picked up on. First of all, one of the things that really upset me is leopards no longer exist. That's a real shame. Such a beautiful animal. We still have them now. The numbers are not what we'd like them to be. It sounds like the only way you can get near one is a virtual leopard now.
Yeah, that's one of the sad realities. The impacts of climate change, they accelerate through the years, and they've hit a point in 2028 to where some of the beautiful aspects of nature are no longer with us, including the Amur leopards as well as the Miombo forest, and we can only experience them in a virtual world. And as we've been able to program scarcity into our virtual worlds, these aspects of nature have gone on to become some of the most valuable assets of our virtual worlds.
And how does that work? Is that non-fungible tokens, or is it something that's built on top of Bitcoin, or is it a shitcoin that these things are built on?
It's a non-fungible token, but it is built on Bitcoin. The primitive non-fungible tokens of your time, while they are very innovative and creative in many ways, and give us insight into future possibilities. I don't want to give away too many details, but their underlying structure proves to be inadequate. Fortunately, the innovation is happening on a rapid pace with Bitcoin and its second and tertiary layers, and programmability becomes much more advanced on Bitcoin protocol, which allows for this new wave of innovation, with the difference of having a core fundamental structure that is much stronger and sustainable for the longer term.
Well, that's good to hear. It's not all negative by the sounds of it. It sounds like Bitcoin has become stronger and maybe more accessible to more people. But have you seen that with this face world that you speak of, it sounds like a terrible place. Have you found that it's infested people's minds and given them a high time preference where they're not able to think for themselves? Is it harder to get through to these people than it is in my time?
Yeah, digital addiction, I believe it's already starting to take place in your time, but it's only accelerated as technology has advanced and as the world has changed. I believe virtual reality is just starting to become a real thing in your time. And you can imagine, how difficult it can be to take your eyes away from a two-dimensional 6-inch screen. Just imagine being able to completely immerse yourself in a world of absolute abundance where anybody can live like complete royalty for almost no cost. And you combine that with the struggle that many people are facing that's been catalyzed by the coronavirus and the economic repercussions from that, and the dependence on digital applications and dependence on the government. Many people have been weakened, and certainly the path of least resistance for them is to engulf themselves in the digital comforts of face world and avoid the realities of what's going on around them. It's what's really accelerated the money wars here, and it's our weakest point as a society, that the people of your time would do the future a favor in working to protect while they still can.
So what can we do? What can we do outside of what we're trying to do now? Is there anything that you see that we need to try and work harder on, or things that we're turning our attention to that maybe are a little bit pointless? Anything you can tell us to help us?
Well, I know from my own experience that when you're living day to day, it's difficult to understand the significance of the moment. That's how I was, when I was spending my time in the Metaverse. It wasn't until that I was pulled into or led down the rabbit hole of Bitcoin that I realized what was happening with the existing system and how it didn't provide a path for the future generations to have the future that they deserve, and realizing that Bitcoin was the only option to provide that path. So the first thing they can do is just understand how important the time they're living in is, and understand that there is no other time in history where their actions can have more of an impact. This is why I'm choosing to return to your specific timeline, because it's when my story and my experiences can have the maximum impact. Look around, understand what's going on, understand the path the world is heading, and educate yourself in Bitcoin. It's not something that anyone can convince you of. It's something that you have to come to on your own terms. But if you believe in it, learn how to use it. My story is one path to do that. Your podcast is another. There are many paths to educate yourself. And Bitcoin is something you can vote on with your money if you believe in it. And if you want to take it a step further, you can fight for it.
Yeah, that's great advice. You just mentioned, obviously, you've got your diaries and your OG training material. I've had a look through there and there's some really good content. So for anyone who's listening and maybe they're sat on the fence and, they want to learn some more about Bitcoin and they're new to it now, definitely check that out. It's cypherdiaries.net, and then in the top right, OG training material. And you've got some really, really good stuff in here. It's a lot to get through for anyone, and I wish I could have one of these brain links to lend to people so that it could save them some time. But I think you would agree in saying that it's well worth the time to invest and read through this stuff.
Absolutely. And of course it is, it could be a lifetime of material to ingest if you take it to its farthest level, but there's something in there for everybody, whether it's the rabbit hole content or the opsec material. The benefits of having so many great minds focused on developing one piece of software in the ecosystem around it is that there are entry points that progress as you become more comfortable and as your interests diverge through the many paths that Bitcoin can go. So don't force it. Find what's most interesting to you, find what's most accessible to you, and slowly build off it and have your passion lead the way.
Yeah, like you said, there's just so much to get through. It's in my time anyway, it does take a long time to get through it all. And you're talking about the opsec. That's something that for me, most of the first part of what you've written in the OG rabbit hole, I've already read through. However, the opsec is something personally I find quite difficult. I've been working on it as much as I can. You mentioned the operating system that you've got on your Graphene OS. I've been trying to get that on, you probably won't know of these devices, but it's called a Pixel 3 from a company called Google. I've been trying to flash that on to my Pixel 3, but I've been having some real problems. I don't know if there's any place that you know of that might be able to help me with that, but I definitely want to get it running. It looks fantastic.
Yeah, some of these early stage technologies can be very difficult to onboard. And I know it's extremely frustrating, but always an educational experience at the very worst. I know specifically with the graphene installation that Matt Odell from TFGC YouTube channel has some great content out there.
He does.
And, I totally understand that it's difficult to become motivated to take your OPSEC to the next level when you don't have the immediate threat surrounding you. What's most important at your stage is to start to familiarize yourself and understand the tools that are out there so that when you do need them, you can get up to speed with them as quickly as possible. Because you have to expect that time will come where some of these OPSEC technologies become absolutely critical to your sovereignty.
Yeah, it's been a slow process. I'm slowly getting there, and by the sounds of it, I have not so much time to really get to grips with it, but there's a lot of it, and some of the tools that we've got at the moment are getting better and better, and it sounds like some of them are still around in your time as well.
Again, it's the benefit of having some of the smartest builders and best narrators in the world focused on one network that incentivizes contribution. This is how the path has been set for Bitcoin. And it's why I believe our future and its ultimate state is destined for victory. It's because we have so many great minds working on it, and it's not something that's a hobby or on the side for them. It is their purpose, and they've dedicated their lives and their full intellectual ability to it.
In your time, we have a thing called Twitter here. I spend a lot of my time on there shit posting and learning from some other interesting characters. Where do Bitcoiners meet in your world? Do you still have something similar to Twitter, or have you ever heard of this thing?
We still have the format of tweets.
Okay.
Bitcoiners are forced to migrate away from the centralized providers of these social applications in due time. Fortunately, in 2028, we have an open digital universe called the Metaverse, in which anybody can build new experience apps, games, can communicate freely without the risk of censorship or being shadow banned. It's a virtual world that is run on Bitcoin at the foundation. There are many ways to earn and interact with Bitcoin. It is, if there's anywhere in my world where we can be free, it is in the Metaverse. And this is an area where the sooner we can get this virtual world up to speed, the better off we'll be for the coming money wars. It's a current point of weakness where the centralized technology companies have the advantage of building much faster and have much more resources. And the people of your time are already in strong desire of these worlds, whether it's from the coronavirus or just from the acceleration of digital experiences. The people are ready, and unfortunately, Bitcoin is not quite ready. And it becomes our central point of failure that our opposing forces exploit against us.
Interesting. This metaverse sounds amazing, because we have a lot of problems in our time where if you speak freely, whether it's true or not doesn't matter so much. It's whether it fits with a certain narrative, and you can be banned from our platforms very easily. It happens quite often. Although we live in a democracy, or we are told we do, it doesn't always feel quite like that.
And this is just the beginning. The coronavirus is the catalyst for a lot of the so-called freedoms from democracy to begin to erode, whether in sometimes in good faith to actually stop the virus, and other times more of an excuse to push other agendas. Regardless, it is our reality. I know you're already experiencing it with the limits that are put on people's physical mobility from the virus, but it also manifests in a growing need for nation states to control their people among an increasing unrest as the pandemic takes its toll on people's health, as well as the economic realities. It becomes more critical for the states to control the narrative, and they use every tool available to them to do that. And these centralized technology companies are an easy target.
Some people in my time actually are starting to believe that the real virus is the government itself, and that the virus called COVID, the numbers don't quite stack up, and that some of the measures that these governments are taking potentially could cause more harm than good, and could cause more deaths through suicides and other issues down the line because of the economic fallout from what they're doing. Does any of that play out in your time, or is it something you maybe can't disclose?
Well, there's no doubt that there's a great deal of suffering from the virus, and the majority of it comes from the so-called solutions to the virus rather than the virus itself. And whether it's well-intentioned or not, it really doesn't matter, because the reality is the repercussions end up being strongly against the people. And this is what we're still fighting today, the repercussions from this.
Wow, 8 years later. So can you talk me through what's sort of happening in your time in terms of after coronavirus? In my time, they've basically told us that there's an infinite amount of money. None of us can quite work out exactly where it comes from. Some of us are guessing maybe it comes from behind the sofa, but others have said that they have some printer and that it goes brr, and that they're in all these countries all around the world and that it's printing. What does that mean in the future? What happens because of them doing this? It sounds weird to me that they can just create this money from nothing, because I would have thought that you would need to put time and energy into something to create value, but it seems that's no longer the case.
Governments have made it clear that any resource that they can create more of, they will absolutely do to its most extreme level. And what becomes clear soon is that there's great power in having the global reserve currency. The US has the benefit of being able to make their money printer go purr for much longer than the rest of the world because of their reserve currency status. Now, as you're also aware, China is working to reset the balance on the global stage. one of their initiatives being their DCEP virtual currency, which I believe they're set to launch in near time. And they have plans to integrate it into their Belt and Road initiative, integrated into all of their, in many ways, very effective social applications, and export these technologies to other developing nations, which become very much in need for these technologies. First of all, because their currencies totally deteriorate through the stimulus to manage the pandemic, and also for the great need of surveilling their populations. China's solution of their DCEP currency and their communication apps is a plug-and-play solution to mass surveillance. We come to find out that surveillance is the killer app of central bank currencies, and China is the first to truly exploit that. And as this inertia takes place, the threat to the U.S.'s status to having the global reserve currency becomes real. And this is when the money wars that we're fighting today really start to take shape. The U.S. is clearly behind in the beginning and forced to collude with their technology companies, namely Face World, to get immediate distribution of a US dollar-backed virtual coin, and to get the benefits of the surveillance that comes with that. And at the same time, they launch an all-out assault on other currencies, most specifically the only open and free one, which is Bitcoin.
Pretty scary. I don't like the idea of having a corporation. This face world thing sounds like a god-awful place. And by the sounds of it, from reading through your diary, it has its own currency linked to it. And that doesn't sound like a good idea at all to me.
I know, you can imagine, like I said, when you're living in a virtual world of absolute abundance, where all of your desires can be catered to, and then throw in the surveillance capabilities of virtual reality, where it's not just a device tracking your location and what you're inputting into it, but actually tracking all of your senses through the hardware that goes on your head. With the advancements in artificial intelligence, algorithms can easily connect the output from your senses to your thoughts, desires, and fears.
It sounds like they can literally read your mind in a way.
They can literally read your mind, but then the virtual currency takes it to the next level to where they can incentivize your behavior, so that surveillance turns into actual manipulation. And of course, this is an extremely powerful tool for nation states who are in a deep need to control their populations through their narratives, and they exploit it to its fullest.
Yeah, it sounds very much like we should avoid that. Obviously, growing up before having this download and having all this information, your OG material, if you could go back in time, well, you can, because you're speaking to me, but I'm guessing you could only go back to one point in time. Is that right?
I can only travel through the digital realm. So I can only communicate with the people of your time. My physical presence remains here in 2028, locked up in this abandoned warehouse and hiding. If I could escape here, trust me, I would.
So if you could go back in the physical world and actually speak to yourself, now that you know what you know, and you have all this information about Bitcoin, and you understand why it's here, and you understand what could go wrong, or sounds like has gone wrong in your time, what would you tell yourself?
Well, in many ways, I was just a kid and not quite prepared for our harsh realities and for facing them. I believe my GMA was aware of this, and she tailored the pace of my education probably correctly. I'm only 18 years old now, and it wasn't until just a few months ago to where I was pushed into learning about Bitcoin on its most fundamental level and understanding the natural path of our society without it. With the information beforehand, I would have loved to have joined the front lines of the money wars, but the reality is I probably wouldn't have the maturity to practice the correct judgment when faced with the difficult situations that come with the war. So my timing was probably just right, but I think for many people in your time, the timing is just right for them now to start to educate themselves and understand what their options are and understand how they can fight for a better future for themselves and future generations.
It's obviously to a lesser extent, but I sometimes feel like I'm fighting a war here now, because trying to explain this stuff and trying to explain why it's so important that we have freedom of speech and that we have free money, it feels almost an impossible task at times, because people are so glued to their phones and their social media and watching nonsense on TV and talking about celebrity gossip and just reciting what they're told on the news and living in fear. It seems there's no more space in their brains for more information, especially information that goes against everything they have been told and everything they currently believe. So I don't know if you have any tips to help. I've started the podcast hoping some people will listen and it will at least grab some of their interest. But yeah, any sort of advice would be very helpful.
Well, the reality of the money wars is it's not a war fought through bombs and bullets, but through narratives and software. So the best we can do is improve our narratives and software, and I believe everybody can contribute to either or both. Yourself choosing podcasts, I know how frustrating it can be to reach people, but as long as you can impact at least one person, that person is likely to go on and impact somebody else. So our impacts compound on each other, and together they end up having a great deal of impact, even though it doesn't feel like it in the time. At the same time, our builders can make our software stronger and easier for people to use in new and interesting ways. Of course, that's one of the most effective ways to onboard people into the free and open financial system. My story is another approach. The best we can do is to provide people with all of the options so that they can find the path that makes most sense for them. And while it feels futile at times, our only option is to fight for this. This is our purpose. This is what we're here to do. And through our collective actions, we will ultimately prevail, because there's no way the other side can match our determination.
I think you're absolutely right. There seems to be, certainly in my time, there seems to be a buzz. There seems to be a sort of feeling between those who are deep in this space that is a never back down approach, an approach that is ruthless, and that we will not give in to the bullshit. And that's nice to see, because it's not something I've seen in any other industry, and well, I've never experienced it in my life before. So I do feel confident, but I have to say it does scare me seeing what's happening in your timeline. And I think maybe that's one of the reasons you've also done this recruitment reward. So could you maybe tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. So part of my battle on the front lines, I gave up. I don't want to go into details, but I gave up a large amount of my Bitcoin for the greater good of the cause, but I did save just a tiny bit to be able to include in my story and to hopefully incentivize readers to educate themselves through my story. So there was one Bitcoin hidden in the form of a wallet seed phrase within the contents of my story upon the release on the halving of your time, which coincided with the halving in my story of 2028. Participants in the quest for this OG recruitment reward were given the key to unlock the clues, and the quest began, and ultimately one victor found the seed phrase and unlocked that one Bitcoin. And the best thing to come out of this was the enthusiasm and incentivizing people who maybe otherwise would have passively disregarded the story and its learnings to actually be motivated to learn and educate and go down the path that maybe they otherwise would not have. So it was all I had, my story and that one Bitcoin to give the people of your time. So it was the one contribution I could give.
Well, that's very generous, and I hope that whoever has claimed that prize goes on to do great things, and I'm sure they will do. That's hugely generous. The idea of giving any of my Bitcoin away, I shudder at the thought, so thank you for doing that. And I can only imagine in your time, 2028, judging from what I can understand about this technology and how much of a superior money it is to every other form of money we've had and will have in the future, I can only imagine it is worth a significant amount in the dollars if you still have them, or space world coin, shitcoin things that you have. I imagine it's worth a lot. So thank you for giving that up to help other people.
I wish I could say it was entirely selfless, but in many ways it was selfish, because it's my only hope to escaping my current reality.
So can you tell us, sorry to interrupt you there, you said you were in a warehouse. I'm sure you can't obviously give us too much information in case, I don't know, they've found a way to listen in or they could find you from our conversation, but can you tell us something without giving away too much?
Well, ultimately, on the front lines in the money wars, I made a sacrifice for Bitcoin, and in that sacrifice, I gave up all potential for returning to my life of comfort, and I'm now in a life of hiding. The whereabouts I don't entirely know. The one person I can trust in this world, Geist, has me holed up in some kind of abandoned warehouse. Even if I did know the location, I have to assume that the people who are after me could be listening to this podcast right now. But as I said, all I have is my story, and I had that one Bitcoin. So my only hope is that by distributing it to the people of your time, I can convince enough additional people to stand up for Bitcoin and reverse the hands of the clock, so to speak, and change my reality here so that my sacrifice would not have been necessary and could have been avoided. That is the ultimate lesson of my story, is that our actions can shape the future. And if more people in your time stand up, my reality here can change. And instead of being in hiding right now, I can be back on the front lines where I belong, and continuing to fight for Bitcoin in the money wars.
Well, that would be amazing. And I swear to you, I'll do everything I can in my time to make that a reality for you, because it's amazing to hear what you've gone through, and I have massive respect for you. So I will do everything within my power, and I'm sure everyone else listening will do the same. Thanks again for what you're doing. It really is fantastic.
I have to thank you, Max. You're on the front lines there, and while I'm fighting as much as I can here, in your time, the threat feels less real. So in many ways, it takes much more courage to do what you're doing. So thank you for fighting the good fight and doing everything that you can.
In all honesty, I couldn't do anything else. Again, it's not really selfless. It's once I understood how important this technology was, I tried getting on with the things I was doing prior to understanding it, and everything just felt pointless. At the end of the day, I wake up and all I can think about is trying to push this thing forward, because I truly believe that this can change the world. And yeah, like I say, that's not a selfless thing. It has just absolutely captivated me, and I can't think of a more worthy way to spend my time. You said in your diary that I think it was your grandmother who'd said to you in her final words, Otto, value your time. It's your most scarce possession. And that's very, very true. And I can't think of a better way to spend our time than try and make the world a better place.
This is absolutely our revolution. And we should feel privileged in many ways to have something so important to fight for. So it's up to us to grasp that opportunity and make the most of it. I certainly share the sentiment that once you understand the importance of what Bitcoin can do, everything else seems meaningless. And that's our reality.
It's a weird reality. Yeah, there's the orange pill, and after you've taken that, it is difficult to look at the world in the same way, and you begin to question everything, really, because money is really at the heart of every interaction we have as humans, and it's being controlled by entities that are not doing things in our best interest. And once you realize that you were being controlled, it's pretty scary.
It's been used against us for so long, and with the collusion with technology companies, the exploitive power against us only becomes stronger. We're so fortunate to have Bitcoin as an alternative to build the foundation for a new system. We should be so thankful for the creators who created this option for us, because otherwise we'd be destined for a state of total dystopia. Our only option is to fight for it. That's all we have to do. And we have to find our best ways to contribute, whether it's through building or telling stories, convincing others to join, and grasp those opportunities.
In your time, does it become any more clear, or do we have any contact from Satoshi? Because in my time, we've heard absolutely nothing, and I think most of us agreed that that is for the best. But I wondered if anything changes in your time.
Well, that is one part of the plot of my story, which I cannot give away. But what you said is very much true, that Satoshi would never explicitly give away his identity. Mm-hmm. But in many ways, it can be inferred, only in a way that does not sacrifice the distributive ownership of Bitcoin. But there's certainly a story to tell in my diaries that go more into that.
Yeah, so for anybody who's listening now, you have to go and have a read through this. It's brilliant. I feel sorry for you that you're having to live through this, and it sounds very painful and difficult, but to read through it just is otherworldly. It's amazing to hear what is happening. Absolutely captivating. So for anyone who hasn't already, make sure you check it out. And also, once you've read through it, to then go through all of the reading material that you've put together. It's a really good, for anyone who's new to Bitcoin, that's just such a good place to start and just look through that material. I had one question, and don't worry, it's not anything to do with price, but I just, there's something that bugs me every day in my time, actually someone that bugs me every day. He's probably not still tweeting in your time, but there's this character called Peter Schiff, and he's a very, very dull man. He tweets about Bitcoin daily. It's obviously something that's on his mind 24/7. He constantly attacks it, but his arguments are flawed and childlike. I just wondered, if and when does this man capitulate? Does he buy at 10x the price, 50x the price, or does he never buy and he just sits alone and cries?
Well, for all the detractors of Bitcoin, we have to take a close look at what their incentives are. And it's hard to know exactly what goes through the heads of people like Peter, but it's easy to see how he benefits from saying what he says about Bitcoin. So I think in many ways it's self-fulfilling talk. So does he capitulate? Only when it's in his best interest to do so. Which maybe never, but comparing the different assets in the world, it all comes down to utility and scarcity. Gold, while it does have scarcity in your time, that scarcity erodes as we explore the solar system and have access to much more gold that is out there.
So you
Bitcoins.
mine asteroids, do you?
Well, I can't say that it's a current reality, but it's becoming much closer to a reality.
Okay.
That potential is already impacting gold's value in the mind of the money that people choose. And I know in your time that people detract Bitcoin for its seemingly lack of utility, but what they fail to see is that Bitcoin is not static. It's always growing as more people build upon it. And its natural programmability and being native to the internet allows it to be used in new ways that money has not been used before. And the ways that it can be used only compounds as time goes on. So its utility increases at an accelerated pace. So it becomes very clear to all the detractors, whether they admit it or not, that when it comes to utility and scarcity, there is no asset like Bitcoin.
One thing that we talk about, or has been talked about quite a lot in our current Bitcoin community, is micropayments, and whether it's ever going to be something that will be used en masse, and whether it can unlock potential to use money in ways that we can't yet imagine. Are micropayments being used in your sort of virtual reality worlds and things like that?
Yes, on many levels, maybe not in the ways that seem most obvious. I think, again, going back to the detractions against Bitcoin and being used for everyday commerce is the last thing that Bitcoin is used for, frankly, because there's so many other interesting ways to use money that previously were not possible until Bitcoin, and especially with the second layer solutions built on top of Bitcoin. Micropayments is a big part of that. The additional programmability that comes with these second layer solutions provides alternatives to accessing content. Micropayments happening in the form of being spent as content is being consumed through time.
That sounds like a good idea.
Something that was previously impossible with fiat money. And then in gaming, in the metaverse, my primary form of income, besides my universal basic income, which everybody receives, is by earning Bitcoin in games like Samurai Squad. And in Samurai Squad, there are many interesting ways to earn Bitcoin, including microtransactions, as well as earning the interest accumulated from the players staking their Bitcoin. Again, another way to use the programmability of Bitcoin in a way that was previously not possible.
Interesting. With mining, I mean, at the moment, I feel like we're still very much in the early stages. It's something that is fascinating to me. And I'm looking at some of the work that people are doing using natural gas and other resources that otherwise would go to waste. Is that a trend that continues? Have you got nuclear, or what's happening in terms of mining? Have the nation states jumped in yet, or is it still more private?
As long as there's an incentive to earn Bitcoin, the creative minds of the world will find a way to earn that Bitcoin, and mining is the way of many to do that. And it's happening through all types of entities. It's happening to capture wasted energy. New sources of energy are sprung up specifically for earning Bitcoin through mining. Nation states realize that they can spend their limitless fiat currency to mine and earn Bitcoin. Of course, when doing that, they are putting themselves on the opposing lines of the US and the money wars, but for some of them, it's worth it. They've suffered under the global reserve currency status of the US for a long time and are desperate for their independence, just like many of our people. The opportunities in mining unleash the creative abilities of many people and organization, and that's a trend that continues through my time, at least I can say.
Wow, it's fascinating to hear what's coming, and it sounds like some of the ideas that we talk about a lot have actually played out in your time, but sadly, it's freedom that we need to work on. Are there any other points that you wanted to touch on whilst we're on this call? I've assumed that you have some form of time limit because people will be tracking you, and I don't want to put you at risk, but I want to make sure that you get your message across. So is there anything that you wanted to touch on that we haven't?
I appreciate that sensitivity. The money wars do continue here, and I'm still able to fight my battle through my narratives and through my Android device. The biggest message that I can tell the people of your time is to educate themselves in Bitcoin, find the path that is easy for them to go down, and follow their passions as they go through it. Vote for Bitcoin, fight for Bitcoin, however they can best contribute, and fight for the potential for a better future that we all deserve.
That's some wise words. So I just want to thank you again for coming on the show. And I'd like to say, if you ever find a way of actually traveling time physically and you manage to get to our time, I've been told by many people who understand this stuff that will never be possible. However, I'd love to have a beer with you. If you do find your way here, do give me a shout. Just contact me. Well, I'm sure you'll find a way, but if you do, I'd love to have a drink and talk some more Bitcoin. But like I say, I don't want to put you at risk. You've already done enough for this community, and I thank you again.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Max. That would be an absolute pleasure. And if I ever do have that opportunity, I can assure you that I will take you up on that. Thank you so much for taking this time out of your fight. It's an honor to fight by your side, and it's an absolute privilege to talk with you.
Amazing. Well, hopefully we'll speak again. Thank you, and keep fighting the good fight.
Likewise, Max. Stay safe.